I'm divorcing you, and then I'll live off every dime you've ever earned." Brandon Hayes' smug voice echoed through the courtroom, dripping with arrogance and entitlement. Camille Ross sat frozen, her hands trembling over the neatly stacked divorce papers, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. All the years of loyalty, the trust, the quiet sacrifices dismissed in a single venomous sentence. Yet, beneath the surface of her composed exterior, a spark flickered. A small, inconspicuous envelope sat tucked under her documents, unnoticed by Brandon, holding secrets that could change everything. For the first time, Camille allowed herself a fleeting knowing smile. The room was suffocating with tension, the air thick with anticipation. Justice seemed impossible in that very moment, and yet Camille's silence carried a promise a storm was quietly brewing. Before we dive into the full story, drop a comment with your location and local time. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to follow Camille's journey and all our thrilling stories. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Camille Ross sat quietly in the front row, her posture perfect, her hands clasped in her lap. Yet the tension in her jaw betrayed the storm of thoughts running through her mind. Across the room, Brandon Hayes lounged arrogantly, flashing his signature smirk to anyone who dared glance at him. Every gesture he made, the tapping of his expensive watch, the casual toss of his designer tie, the knowing glances he gave the attorneys, screamed superiority. The courtroom was buzzing with whispers, murmurs of anticipation, as lawyers, clerks, and journalists prepared for the proceedings. Camille's lawyer, Lauren Mitchell, leaned in and whispering just enough for Camille to hear, "Remember, stay calm. Watch him. Every little detail matters." Camille nodded subtly, the smallest twitch of her fingers signaling acknowledgement, but her mind was already running ahead, replaying every misstep, every betrayal Brandon had thrown her way over the years. Brandon had built his life around the assumption that Camille would never truly stand up for herself. He believed her quiet nature, her patience, and her unwillingness to confront him publicly were signs of weakness. That assumption had been his greatest mistake. The judge entered, and the room fell into an immediate reverent silence. Judge Eleanor Davis, a woman whose presence alone commanded respect, scanned the courtroom, her sharp eyes briefly meeting Camille's. Camille offered a slight nod, professional calm, yet carrying an unspoken acknowledgement of trust. This was her ally in more ways than one, and she had every intention of letting that relationship work in her favor, without drawing unnecessary attention. The clerk called the case. Brandon stood adjusting his tailored suit, and began his rehearsed narrative. "Your Honor, I am here today to formalize the divorce from Camille Ross. Let me make this abundantly clear. I have no intention of managing my life independently. I have every right, given our lifestyle and her wealth, to live comfortably on what she has earned." A ripple of murmurs ran through the courtroom. Some tried not to stare, but everyone caught the arrogance dripping from his words. His entitlement was palpable, and even the reporters instinctively leaned forward, sensing the explosive nature of what was unfolding. Camille's fingers tightened around the edge of the envelope hidden beneath her stack of documents. She could feel the weight of it, not just physically, but symbolically. Every secret she had uncovered, every careful move she had planned, every injustice she had endured, all encapsulated in that small package. Brandon had no idea that in his smug confidence, he had stepped directly into her trap. Lauren whispered again, "He wants you to react. He wants to see fear weakness. Don't give him that." Camille closed her eyes briefly, inhaling deeply, centering herself. She imagined every sarcastic remark Brandon had made over the past year, the insinuations, the belittling comments, the casual threats about taking control of her life and her fortune. Each memory fueled a quiet, powerful resolve. She would not let him win. Not today. Not ever. The proceedings continued with Brandon presenting what he called evidence of his entitlement lists of shared assets, financial statements, and carefully curated accounts designed to appear as though Camille had been withholding wealth. He spoke with practiced ease, assuming his charm would sway the judge, the jury, and anyone in the room who might harbor sympathy for Camille. But Camille's mind was elsewhere. meticulously dissecting every document, every line, every assumption Brandon had made. She recognized the patterns, the discrepancies, the intentional omissions. Brandon had made himself predictable, leaving traces of greed that, when interpreted correctly, would reveal his true nature. And she had done exactly that, prepared for every move he could possibly make. As the morning wore on, Brandon's bravado began to irritate even the courtroom staff. He leaned back in his chair, flipping through documents without reading them, confidently, assuming the judge would not notice his casual flippancy. Camille observed everything. The way he smirked at the clerk. The way he rolled his eyes when Lauren interjected with a procedural question. The way he dismissed any hint of decorum. To anyone else, these might have seemed like minor annoyances, but Camille cataloged each as evidence of character, of arrogance, of entitlement, of a man who believed the world owed him obedience and indulgence. Mid-morning, the judge called for a brief recess. As the room cleared, reporters huddled near the doors trying to capture the slightest hint of drama. Brandon strutted past Camille, lowering his voice to a smirk-filled mutter. "I can't wait until you're finished paying for my lifestyle." His words were meant to sting, to provoke, to break her composure. Camille allowed herself a slow, deliberate smile. The envelope beneath her hand pressed against her palm, warm and reassuring. In silence, she reminded herself of the meticulous work she had done, the financial trails, the emails, the secret accounts, and the testimonies she had collected quietly from Olivia Grant and Marcus Lee. Each piece fit perfectly into a puzzle, designed not only to expose Brandon, but to dismantle the very foundation of his hubris. Lauren approached her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're ready for this, Camille. He thinks he's winning, but he's been blind to everything. Today that changes." Camille nodded again, but this time the acknowledgement carried more than professionalism. It carried the unshakable calm of someone who had already won in her mind, even if the courtroom had yet to see it. Recess ended, and the courtroom slowly refilled. Brandon strutted to his seat as if commanding the room, completely unaware that the balance of power had quietly shifted. Camille sat poised, calm, her back straight, her eyes forward, hiding nothing but revealing everything through her unshakable presence. She was no longer simply a participant. She was the silent force around which the entire room would soon revolve. The next phase of the hearing would begin with Brandon presenting his arguments formally. He expected bluster and intimidation to work in his favor, but Camille had no intention of responding in kind. Her silence, her careful observation, her unwavering presence, these were her weapons. And as she glanced at the envelope one more time, a spark of anticipation ignited in her chest. Brandon Hayes had no idea that the entire game had already been set against him, and that Camille Ross was not the woman to be underestimated. Even the walls of the courtroom seemed to pulse with the impending clash. Every step Brandon took toward the podium, every smug glance he threw over his shoulder, every confident assertion he made, Camille cataloged and prepared. In her mind, the story of betrayal, arrogance, and greed was about to reach its first turning point. And when it did, the world would see Camille not as a quiet, patient victim, but as a woman who had waited, observed, and prepared to claim her justice. The courtroom settled into an uneasy quiet as Brandon Hayes leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face. He had no idea that Camille Ross, sitting just a few feet away, had already uncovered the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Every financial move he had made over the years, every hidden account, every secretive investment, Camille had quietly pieced it all together. She had watched, waited, and documented with meticulous precision, knowing the day would come when the truth would no longer remain buried. Brandon began presenting his evidence with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing to the thick stack of documents before him, "all of these statements and records prove that I have been transparent in all matters regarding joint assets. Camille and I agreed to these arrangements. There is no fraud, no concealment, only a division of property that is fair and equitable." Camille's eyes narrowed slightly. Fair and equitable, she thought, suppressing a tight smile. She remembered the late-night emails she had intercepted, the accounts he had opened under aliases, and the investments he had diverted without her knowledge. Each of these revelations painted a portrait of a man whose entire life was a performance one, built on deception, arrogance, and self-interest. Lauren Mitchell, sitting at Camille's side, whispered softly, "Watch him. Notice his confidence. He's laying the groundwork for his own unraveling." Camille's hand subtly brushed against the envelope tucked beneath her legal documents, the weight of it grounding her, reminding her of the careful strategy she had orchestrated. Brandon continued, oblivious to the quiet storm gathering at the other end of the courtroom. "I have ensured that Camille has always had access to funds, that she has never been deprived of anything she is entitled to. I've been generous, accommodating, and above all, transparent." He paused, clearly expecting murmurs of approval from the onlookers. And yet he added, his tone turning sharp. "Camille insists on making accusations that are not only baseless, but defamatory." The judge's eyes flickered with interest. Judge Eleanor Davis was not one to be swayed by theatrics or self-aggrandizing speeches. Her sharp gaze shifted from Brandon to Camille, and in that brief moment, Camille felt a sense of quiet affirmation. She had prepared for this. Every smirk, every claim, every boast Brandon had made would serve as the contrast to the reality she was about to reveal. Camille's mind retraced the steps that had led her here. There had been subtle signs early on, discrepancies in statements, unfamiliar transaction codes, unexpected transfers. At the time, she had brushed them off, unwilling to suspect the man she had trusted most. But as months passed, patterns emerged. She had enlisted the help of Olivia Grant, a former employee who had witnessed Brandon's manipulations firsthand, and Marcus Lee, a longtime friend who had helped her trace the financial maze. Piece by piece, Camille reconstructed the hidden ledger of Brandon's deceit. Now, as he spoke, Camille could almost hear the irony in his words. Every declaration of honesty, every claim of fairness, was the very evidence of his audacity. He had spoken so freely, so confidently, that he had inadvertently left trails of his own wrongdoing. Camille's plan hinged on this very overconfidence, the idea that a man like Brandon, blinded by entitlement, would underestimate her preparation. The proceedings grew tense as Brandon's attorney, a sharp and aggressive man, began to interject. "Your Honor, if I may?" He said, "My client's statements are complete and accurate. Any suggestion to the contrary is purely speculative." Camille leaned forward slightly, though her face remained an impassive mask. She recalled the long nights of cross-referencing documents, comparing bank statements, and reviewing contracts that Brandon assumed she would never access. Each inconsistency, each hidden account, each unauthorized withdrawal was documented meticulously in the folder she now held. The envelope beneath her papers contained the culmination of months of quiet vigilance, the evidence that would expose the full extent of Brandon Hayes' duplicity. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of Camille's lips. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to react. Her silence was her weapon, her patience a shield. Brandon's arrogance was his undoing. He had constructed a castle of lies, and he had done so openly, confidently, for everyone to see. Camille only needed to reveal the cracks at the right moment. Brandon's tone shifted slightly as he continued to outline his so-called generosity. "I have provided Camille with luxury, with stability, with every comfort one could ask for. And yet she questions my integrity, implying that I have manipulated financial arrangements to my own benefit. These allegations are outrageous and unbecoming." Camille's gaze remained steady. Her eyes locked on him, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered the small victories she had achieved in silence, confirming hidden transfers, tracing offshore accounts, documenting instances where Brandon had attempted to divert joint funds. Each discovery had been a thread in the tapestry of truth she was now ready to display. Lauren Mitchell leaned closer, her whisper cutting through the hum of the courtroom. "Keep watching him, Camille. Notice how he slips up, how every word reinforces your evidence. He's unraveling on his own." Camille nodded slightly, her mind sharp and focused. The irony was intoxicating Brandon Hayes. so sure of his dominance, was exposing every weakness that would lead to his downfall. As Brandon droned on, Camille's thoughts flicked to the envelope once more. Inside were documents Olivia had provided, screenshots of emails, and a detailed ledger of every unauthorized transaction Brandon had executed over the past 2 years. It was a meticulous record, undeniable in its clarity. Brandon's words, once a shield, were now the very thing that would pierce his armor. The tension in the room was palpable. Spectators leaned forward, sensing the weight of what was about to unfold, even if they didn't yet know the specifics. Camille's calm, measured presence contrasted sharply with Brandon's self-assured bluster. Every confident gesture, every smug remark only strengthened her position in the silent duel that was being waged between them. For a brief moment, Camille allowed herself to reflect on the magnitude of the situation. She had been underestimated, belittled, and dismissed. She had been portrayed as weak, passive, even naive. Yet, here she was, composed and in control, holding the power to reveal a truth Brandon had worked so hard to conceal. Her patience, her vigilance, and her intelligence had brought her to this moment. The judge called the courtroom to order again, signaling the continuation of Brandon's presentation. He rose completely unaware that every assertion, every boast, every feigned act of fairness had been meticulously documented by Camille. She remained still calm, poised, the picture of quiet authority. She did not flinch, she did not react, but inside a quiet satisfaction began to bloom. Brandon Hayes had underestimated her at every turn. He had assumed her silence was weakness. He had assumed her patience was complacency. And he had assumed that his charm, his wealth, and his confidence would protect him from scrutiny. But Camille Ross had watched, waited, and prepared. Now every word he spoke, every gesture he made, was feeding into the evidence she would reveal. As the morning session drew on, Camille's mind remained focused, cataloging every detail, every slip, every overconfident claim. Her strategy was simple: let him talk, let him reveal himself, and then at the precise moment, unveil the truth. The envelope, her secret arsenal, remained within reach, a tangible reminder of her diligence, her patience, and her quiet strength. In that tense, silent preparation, Camille realized that she had already won in the most important sense. She had reclaimed her power, her agency, and her foresight. The public display of Brandon's arrogance would soon meet the precise counterweight of truth. And when it did, there would be no room left for his lies, no refuge for his deceit. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision of arrogance and justice. Camille sat poised, her mind sharp, her presence commanding, a woman underestimated, overlooked, but far more powerful than anyone in that room could imagine. Brandon Hayes had laid bare his true nature, and Camille Ross was ready to expose it piece by piece with unwavering calm and absolute precision. After the courtroom session ended for the morning, Camille Ross returned to her office with a quiet determination. The courthouse had been a stage for Brandon Hayes' arrogance, but behind the polished walls of her private office, the real work would begin. Camille had spent months preparing for this moment, and now it was time to ensure that every piece of evidence was accounted for, every secret accounted for, and every trail of deception fully documented. Lauren Mitchell, her legal strategist and closest ally in this ordeal, had already begun organizing the files. Camille, we need to cross-reference these statements with the offshore accounts Olivia found. If Brandon has been moving money without authorization, it has to show up somewhere in the records. Lauren said, her eyes scanning the documents with meticulous precision. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and perfectly in tune with Camille's focused demeanor. Camille nodded, sliding the envelope out from its hidden spot beneath a stack of divorce papers. The envelope contained a carefully curated set of evidence screenshots of incriminating emails, financial statements that didn't match official filings, and a detailed ledger of suspicious transactions. Each page represented hours of quiet surveillance, discreet inquiries, and subtle confirmations from allies who had been silently assisting her over the past months. She picked up her laptop and began to verify the sequences, cross-checking dates and amounts. A subtle frown creased her forehead as she noticed discrepancies that Brandon had hoped would remain hidden. Transfers labeled as consulting fees were actually withdrawals to accounts registered under aliases. Expenses marked as personal were in fact substantial investments that had never been reported to her. Brandon had thought he was clever, but Camille's patience and attention to detail were far more formidable than he could imagine. Meanwhile, Marcus Lee, a longtime friend and confidant, arrived with additional information. Camille, while I dug through the remaining ledgers, some of the investments you questioned last month, they were funneled into properties registered under shell companies. I've traced the ownership links. It all leads back to Brandon. His voice carried the weight of discovery, and Camille allowed herself the briefest nod of approval. Marcus had been invaluable in translating the tangled web of financial misdirection into a coherent trail of evidence. Olivia Grant, the former employee who had witnessed Brandon's manipulations firsthand, joined the session via secure video call. Her presence was discreet but critical. I recorded every instance where Brandon tried to bypass Camille's oversight. Olivia explained, her voice steady. I also saved emails showing him instructing accountants to reroute funds and conceal transfers. I never wanted to be involved, but Camille's been meticulous. If anyone can hold him accountable, it's her. Camille listened attentively, typing notes and verifying the facts. Every statement, every confirmation, every piece of correspondence added to the growing mosaic of proof. She was careful not to let emotions cloud her judgment. This was not about revenge in the traditional sense, but about uncovering the truth and ensuring justice prevailed. Brandon's arrogance had blinded him, and Camille intended to use it against him with surgical precision. The room was filled with the quiet hum of computers and the soft rustle of papers. Camille worked systematically, dividing the evidence into categories: financial fraud, hidden assets, and misappropriation of joint funds. Each category was meticulously documented with timestamp screenshots and corroborating witness statements. The organization alone was a work of art. Fartsalda had a silent testament to Camille's methodical intelligence and patience. Lauren Mitchell leaned back, observing Camille's work. You've done more than just gather evidence. You've created a narrative that the court cannot ignore. Every lie, every omission Brandon made is clearly documented. He's left himself vulnerable at every turn. Her voice was calm, but carried the intensity of someone witnessing a plan coming together perfectly. Camille allowed herself a brief smile, but it was fleeting. There was still much work to do. She needed to anticipate every potential argument Brandon might present in court, every tactic he could employ to discredit her findings. This wasn't just about collecting evidence. It was about constructing an unassailable case. Hours passed, and the envelope that had started as a small, inconspicuous object grew in importance. It was more than just paper and files. It was a manifestation of Camille's diligence, resilience, and unwavering determination. Each document represented a moment where she had resisted fear, had remained patient, and had committed herself to uncovering the truth. The envelope had become her quiet power, a tangible symbol of justice that was patiently waiting for its moment to be revealed. By late afternoon, the team had compiled a comprehensive dossier. Financial anomalies were highlighted, with annotations explaining the discrepancies. Emails were cataloged showing the intent behind each misleading transaction. Witness statements, including Olivia's and Marcus's contributions, were carefully cross-referenced with official documents. Camille and Lauren reviewed the dossier together, ensuring that no detail was overlooked, no inconsistency left unexamined. Camille leaned back in her chair, momentarily closing her eyes. She reflected on the months of quiet preparation, on the patience she had cultivated, and on the resilience required to face someone like Brandon Hayes. He had underestimated her at every turn, assuming her silence was submission, assuming her patience was weakness. In reality, it had been the exact opposite. Her silence had been a shield, her patience a strategy, and now finally she was ready to wield the evidence she had gathered with precision and authority. Lauren placed a reassuring hand on Camille's shoulder. Tomorrow, we start presenting this. Brandon will think he has control, but we both know the truth. And the court will see it too. Camille nodded, her calm demeanor unwavering. She knew that the real battle had only just begun, but for the first time, the scales had shifted in her favor. Brandon's arrogance had created the perfect conditions for exposure, and Camille's methodical preparation had set the stage for justice to prevail. That evening, Camille organized the envelope, carefully ensuring that the documents were in order and ready to be presented at the next hearing. She allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction, knowing that every small, patient effort had brought her closer to the moment when Brandon Hayes' true nature would be revealed. Her calm, measured power had transformed what seemed like a disadvantage into a position of undeniable strength. In the quiet of her office, Camille finally permitted herself a moment to breathe. She looked at the city skyline through the window, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. Justice was not immediate, but it was inevitable. She had done the work she had prepared meticulously, and she would ensure that the truth would be known, that Brandon Hayes would face the consequences of his actions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Camille Ross remained. It seated, her hand resting lightly on the envelope, a symbol of patient strategy and unwavering resolve. The next steps would unfold in the courtroom, where the arrogance of Brandon Hayes would meet the quiet, calculated power of a woman who had waited, observed, and prepared. Camille's silent strength was ready to turn the tide, and nothing could stop it. Camille Ross walked into the sleek modern office building, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floors. The day had begun like any other, yet the tension in her chest was palpable. She knew Brandon Hayes was hiding more than just financial deceit. There had always been whispers, rumors she had initially dismissed, but recent discoveries had forced her to confront the possibility of personal betrayal. Today she would face the truth head-on. She entered the small conference room where Olivia Grant had arranged to meet her, a sense of urgency in her every movement. "Camille, I need to show you something," Olivia said, her voice low but steady. She handed over a tablet, flipping to a folder of messages that had been saved months earlier. Camille's eyes scanned the screen quickly, absorbing the evidence, emails, text messages, and photos confirming Brandon's affair with his personal assistant. The casual, flirtatious tone, the secret meetings, the veiled references to their time together, it was all there. Camille allowed herself only a fleeting pause, a momentary tightening of her jaw. No anger flared, no tear escaped her eye. She had learned long ago that reaction could be dangerous. It could be used against her, twisted into a narrative of emotional instability. Instead, Camille inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She was witnessing betrayal in its rawest form, yet she remained unshaken. Every image, every line of text only strengthened her resolve. Brandon had assumed she would never see this, that his carefully hidden indiscretions would remain obscured. He had misjudged her patience, her attention to detail, her ability to notice what others overlooked. Every deceptive smile, every whispered lie, every step he had taken in secrecy now formed a clear, undeniable pattern. Camille didn't need to speak. She didn't need to confront him impulsively. The evidence would speak for itself, and when it did, there would be no escape. Marcus Lee entered quietly, carrying a folder of corroborating documents he had gathered over the past few weeks. "Camille, I confirmed the dates," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They match up with the time Brandon claimed to be working late. Every meeting, every lunch, every sudden business trip. All of it lines up." He handed her the folder, and she glanced through the pages, her expression unreadable. Camille's mind raced, not with panic, but with strategy. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece, a stepping stone toward exposing the full extent of Brandon's deceit. She meticulously noted the patterns, the repeated excuses, the blatant disregard for her presence and the family they had built together. Each revelation only reinforced her belief in careful, calculated exposure. Later that afternoon, Camille found herself standing in front of Brandon's office, waiting for the moment she knew was coming. Brandon's assistant, unaware of Camille's awareness, greeted her with a nervous smile. "Camille, she began, but Camille cut her off with a calm, authoritative voice. "I know everything." The room fell silent. The assistant's eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing that Camille's presence alone communicated a power far greater than any words. Brandon, summoned to the office by a vague note from his assistant, entered moments later, his confidence immediately challenged by the composure in Camille's posture. "What is this?" Brandon demanded, his voice carrying a mix of confusion and indignation. "Why are you here?" Camille's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. "I think you know exactly why," she said softly, though every word carried the weight of authority. She did not shout, she did not accuse. She stated a simple truth. The calmness in her voice was more intimidating than any outburst could have been. Brandon's eyes flickered toward the assistant, then back to Camille. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. He had always relied on intimidation, on charm, on misdirection. But Camille's steady gaze, the quiet confidence that radiated from her every movement, undermined every tactic he had used for years. "Camille, this is ridiculous," Brandon stammered, attempting to regain control. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know more than you realize," Camille replied evenly. She reached into her bag and pulled out the folder Marcus had provided, placing it on the desk in front of Brandon. "Everything here matches the timeline, the emails, and your secret accounts. Every lie you've told, every meeting you've hidden, every message you've sent to her. Without regard for me, it's all documented." Brandon's face turned a shade paler. He leaned forward, trying to snatch the folder, but Camille held her position of her hand firmly on the documents. "No, Brandon," she said softly, with an edge of authority that left no room for argument. "You underestimate me at your own peril." The assistant, realizing the gravity of the situation, whispered an apology and quickly left the room. Camille didn't react. She allowed the silence to fill the space, letting Brandon sit with the evidence he had thought would never see the light of day. Camille took a seat across from him, maintaining eye contact, every gesture deliberate, measured. "You've assumed my patience was weakness," she continued. "You've assumed my silence meant complacency. You were wrong." Her voice remained calm, almost serene. But beneath it was the power of someone who had endured betrayal, yet had never lost control. Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it, searching for a rebuttal that would restore his fractured ego. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had been cornered not by shouting or threats, but by precision, patience, and intelligence, qualities he had long dismissed in Camille. Camille allowed a long pause, letting the weight of the truth settle. She did not need to elaborate. The documents, the timeline, the emails, and the evidence of deceit were self-explanatory. Brandon's own arrogance had paved the way for his exposure. Finally, she leaned back, her expression composed, almost regal. "This is not about revenge, Brandon," she said softly. "This is about truth. You have chosen to reveal your character through your actions. Now everyone can see it." Brandon's shoulders slumped slightly, the confident veneer slipping, leaving vulnerability in its wake. For the first time, he realized that Camille's strength did not come from anger, from outbursts, or from confrontation. It came from preparation, calmness, and an unshakable commitment to justice. Camille stood, collected the folder, and gave him one last measured look. "You will answer for your choices," she said, her voice calm, unwavering. "And you will see that your arrogance has blinded you to what I am capable of." As she left the office, the weight of the confrontation hung heavily in the air. Brandon remained seated, staring at the folder, understanding too late that the quiet woman he had underestimated had become an unstoppable force. Camille walked out with measured steps, each one echoing the certainty of her path forward, as a path defined by clarity, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Outside the building, Camille paused for a moment, looking at the skyline, feeling the cool wind against her face. She allowed herself a small exhale, a release of tension, but there was no satisfaction in vengeance, only a focused determination. The real battle, the one that would fully expose Brandon Hayes, was still ahead in the courtroom. Today had been preparation, reconnaissance, the delicate alignment of strategy. Tomorrow, everything would change. Camille's mind replayed every detail, every hidden transfer, every secret meeting, every lie Brandon had told. She had documented it all meticulously, ensuring that nothing could be denied, no narrative twisted, no truth concealed. Her patience had been her armor, her observation her weapon. And as she prepared for the next phase, she felt the quiet power of someone who had endured betrayal but had refused to be broken. Tomorrow the courtroom would witness a different Camille Ross, a woman whose calm strength and methodical intelligence had prepared her to confront betrayal not with impulsive rage, but with precision, authority, and undeniable proof. Brandon Hayes had underestimated her at every turn, and soon the consequences of his actions would be laid bare. After leaving Brandon Hayes' office, Camille Ross returned to the sanctuary of her own home, a modern apartment perched above the city that she had built through years of diligence, intellect, and perseverance. The apartment was quiet, almost sterile in its calmness, yet it pulsed with the energy of strategy. Here, away from the courthouse theatrics and Brandon's brazen arrogance, Camille could focus fully on the next phase of her plan, the careful, calculated dismantling of a man who had underestimated her at every turn. Lauren Mitchell was already waiting when Camille arrived, a laptop open and files meticulously arranged on the glass coffee table. "We have everything we need." Lauren began, her tone precise and authoritative. "But timing is everything. Brandon's confidence is his weakness. He believes his charm and wealth make him untouchable. That's exactly the space we need to exploit." Camille sank into the chair opposite Lauren, her hands resting lightly on the table. She allowed herself a small, deliberate smile. She had always understood that the most effective strategy wasn't loud confrontation. It was patience, observation, and striking when the opponent least expected it. Brandon Hayes had given her every opportunity to do exactly that. "We'll approach this in layers," Camille said, her voice calm, each word deliberate. "First, the financials. Olivia Grant's documentation is flawless, but we need to ensure every transaction, every diverted account, and every shell company is cross-verified. Marcus has already started tracing the paths, but we can't leave a single gap. He thrives on his secrets. We'll remove them." Lauren nodded, typing rapidly, confirming that each account, each email, each record had been meticulously cataloged. "Next," Camille continued, "we leverage the narrative he's built himself. He believes everyone sees him as transparent, fair, and untouchable. His overconfidence is the key. Every boast, every careless statement, every arrogant gesture is a thread in the web we will use to entangle him." Camille's mind went over every detail she had observed in the past months, the casual mentions to associates of assets he alone controlled, the smug comments to friends about Camille's supposed ignorance, the small slips in conversation that hinted at offshore accounts and unreported investments. Each of these had been documented in a precise timeline, forming a meticulous pattern that would leave Brandon exposed. "This isn't just about financial exposure," Camille said, leaning forward slightly. "It's also about perception. We'll show the court, and eventually anyone who watches, that his arrogance and deceit are inseparable. He's not a man of integrity. He's a man who believes the world owes him everything. And that belief will be his undoing." Lauren looked up, her eyes sharp. "We'll need to anticipate his responses. He's clever, manipulative. He'll try to deflect, to twist facts, to confuse the court. But Camille, your calm, measured presentation will leave him no foothold. Every lie he tells can be directly countered with verified evidence. Timing and precision are key." Camille nodded. "We move quietly. No leaks, no dramatic gestures outside the court. Every action is calculated. We prepare witnesses, corroborate statements, and align timelines. By the time we confront him directly in court, there will be no escape, no room for misdirection." Over the next several hours, the team worked tirelessly. Marcus Lee cross-verified offshore accounts, tracing the flow of funds with painstaking care. Olivia Grant prepared annotated screenshots, highlighting dates and amounts that corresponded to Brandon's own claims in meetings and emails. Lauren Mitchell compiled every document into a coherent sequential dossier, ensuring that it could be presented efficiently and compellingly in court. Camille observed each step, her mind always 3 moves ahead. She took detailed notes, marking potential points where Brandon might attempt to spin his narrative, considering questions the judge might ask, and envisioning the moments when his overconfidence would become apparent to everyone present. Her calm, controlled demeanor hid the intensity of her focus. She did not need to raise her voice or display anger. The quiet precision of her preparation was far more formidable. In the late afternoon, Camille allowed herself a brief break. She stepped out onto the balcony, the city sprawling beneath her lights, beginning to twinkle as evening settled in. For a moment, she reflected on how far she had come. Brandon Hayes had underestimated her at every turn, assuming her quiet nature was weakness, her patience a sign of complacency. Instead, it had been a shield, a tool, and a strategy. Every day he had assumed she was passive. She had been plotting, preparing, observing. Every careless boast, every hidden transaction he had executed had been carefully noted, documented, and preserved. Returning inside, Camille resumed her work with renewed focus. She reviewed witness statements, ensuring that Marcus and Olivia's contributions were fully integrated into the case. She double-checked dates, as timelines, and cross-references, leaving no room for ambiguity. Each detail was accounted for, each potential counterargument anticipated. Camille's meticulousness was a reflection not only of intelligence, but of resolve, a refusal to allow deception and betrayal to go unchallenged. Lauren looked up from her laptop. "Camille, when we present this, it will be undeniable. The patterns are clear, the evidence airtight. Brandon's arrogance is his undoing, and your composure is our weapon. When he least expects it, everything will come to light." Camille allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod. Yes. Quiet, calculated, undeniable. This is the moment where patience meets power. When we step into that courtroom again, he will realize that he has been blind to everything. Blind to my awareness, blind to my preparation, blind to the strength he underestimated. She returned to the envelope, reviewing the documents one last time. Every transaction, every hidden account, every communication that confirmed Brandon's deceit was represented. She organized them into a sequence that would unfold logically, methodically, leaving no doubt as to the truth. Camille understood the gravity of the next steps. The courtroom would be the stage, Brandon the unwitting actor, and she, the director of the revelation. By nightfall, the plan was fully in place. Camille had ensured that every piece of evidence was verified, every witness prepared, and every narrative carefully structured. She leaned back in her chair, allowing a rare moment of satisfaction. Her strategy was no longer just about proving betrayal. It was about reclaiming power, asserting agency, and demonstrating the strength that had been underestimated for far too long. Brandon Hayes had believed he could manipulate, deceive, and dominate, relying on charm wealth and the presumption of Camille's submission. He had misjudged her entirely. Camille Ross had transformed patience into power, observation into strategy, and quiet endurance into an unstoppable force. The moment of confrontation would be decisive, dramatic, and irrevocable, and she would be ready. As she prepared to leave for the evening, Camille took one final glance at the envelope resting on her desk. It was small, unassuming, yet it contained the culmination of months of silent vigilance. In its pages lay not just evidence, but proof of her resilience, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Tomorrow, she thought Brandon would finally understand the true cost of underestimating her. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet anticipation as Camille Ross walked in her heels, clicking with deliberate precision against the polished floor. Today was not just another hearing. It was the moment where months of silent preparation, patience, and meticulous strategy would finally converge. She adjusted the edge of her blazer, inhaling deeply, letting the weight of her calm authority settle into her posture. Every eye in the room, from the reporters scribbling notes to the clerks shuffling papers, felt the presence of a woman who commanded attention without raising her voice. Brandon Hayes was already seated, radiating confidence. His posture relaxed, his smirk as practiced as ever. He believed he had mastered this performance, that his charm wealth and apparent control over the narrative would carry him through the proceedings. He glanced at Camille, offering a dismissive nod that was meant to intimidate. But Camille met it with an unflinching gaze. No reaction, no emotion, only quiet, measured power that Brandon could neither read nor manipulate. Judge Eleanor Davis entered the room, her presence commanding immediate silence. The gavel struck, and the courtroom fell into a tense stillness. Camille's legal counsel, Lauren Mitchell, gave her a subtle nod from across the table. Camille returned the gesture with a slight, imperceptible smile, signaling readiness. Every plan, every detail they had prepared was about to be executed. Brandon's attorney began the proceedings, laying out the supposed narrative of fairness and equity. He spoke with practiced ease, presenting Brandon as a man of integrity, a victim of unreasonable accusations. Your Honor, my client has always acted transparently with consideration and fairness, the attorney intoned. Any claims suggesting otherwise are not only unfounded, but maliciously intended to misrepresent the facts. Brandon sat back, visibly pleased with the performance. He glanced at Camille, expecting a reaction, a hint of fear, hesitation, or vulnerability. There was none. Camille remained perfectly still, her posture impeccable, her eyes focused and calculating. Inside, she cataloged every word, every gesture, every inflection, mentally preparing for the precise moment she would strike. Lauren Mitchell leaned over, whispering softly, "He's confident, Camille. But his overconfidence is exactly what we need. Watch him. Every casual statement, every boast, it will all unravel." Camille nodded ever so slightly. Overconfidence had always been Brandon's Achilles heel, and she intended to exploit it fully. The first witness was called a former accountant who had handled some of Brandon's business transactions. Camille observed quietly as the witness recounted irregularities in statements, discrepancies that Brandon had attempted to disguise under layers of financial jargon. Brandon's face tightened imperceptibly, but he masked any sign of concern with a carefully controlled expression. Camille noted it, filing it away. Every micro-expression, every subtle sign of unease, strengthened the narrative she had been constructing. As the witness continued, Lauren Mitchell subtly passed Camille a folder containing additional documents. Inside were records and annotations correlating with Brandon's own statements, evidence of offshore accounts, misallocated funds, and unauthorized transfers. Camille's eyes flicked through the pages, confirming dates and amounts, checking that every cross-reference matched perfectly. This was the moment of truth, and she would present it with precision. Brandon, sensing a shift in the courtroom's energy, attempted to regain dominance. "Objection," he barked, suddenly aiming to discredit the witness and disrupt the flow. Judge Eleanor Davis, unshaken, regarded him coolly, sustained in part, "Mr. Hayes, but the information presented remains admissible," she said. Brandon's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, but Camille noticed. Camille's pulse remained steady. She had anticipated this tactic, and it only reaffirmed the meticulous preparation she had undertaken. Every interruption, every objection, every maneuver Brandon employed was predictable, because it was characteristic of a man who relied on intimidation and arrogance instead of integrity. Camille had cataloged these behaviors, knowing precisely how they would be perceived when aligned with her documented evidence. As the morning progressed, Brandon presented more of his evidence: glossy spreadsheets, neat projections, and selective statements, meant to reinforce his image of transparency. But Camille, with quiet authority, followed each line, each figure, each assertion. The subtle inconsistencies, the gaps, the deliberate misrepresentations were all cataloged, ready to be unveiled. She did not speak, did not flinch, did not reveal a reaction. Her calm presence was itself a countermeasure, a silent declaration of control. Lauren Mitchell then began subtly introducing the first pieces of Camille's evidence. It started small annotations on previously presented documents, cross-references that Brandon had assumed no one would notice. Camille observed Brandon's reaction with clinical detachment. At first he blinked once, a minor flicker of concern. Then, as the patterns became apparent, his body language shifted imperceptibly, a tightening of the jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a subtle slump in posture as his confidence wavered. Camille noted each sign with satisfaction. The atmosphere in the courtroom thick in tension, climbing with every exchange. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the unfolding drama. Every person present felt the change, though few could articulate why. Camille's presence alone, combined with the meticulous presentation of evidence, began to tip the scales subtly yet inexorably. Brandon, once supremely confident, was now forced to navigate an environment where he was no longer the dominant force. Camille's mind remained razor-sharp, processing every movement, anticipating every argument, and silently preparing for the decisive moment. She didn't need to interrupt or assert herself loudly. The power of observation preparation and strategic patience was far more formidable than any outburst could have been. Her quiet authority carried an unmistakable weight, the weight of someone who had endured betrayal, meticulously prepared for confrontation, and was fully in command of the moment. As the morning session drew toward a short recess, Camille allowed herself a brief internal acknowledgement. The groundwork had been laid. The evidence was precise, the witness testimonies aligned, and Brandon's overconfidence was now apparent to all. The next phase would require careful presentation, the strategic unveiling of information in a manner that would leave Brandon exposed, confident, only in the illusion of control until the very last moment. Camille stood as the judge called for recess, her posture impeccable, every movement deliberate. She glanced at Brandon Hayes one final time before exiting the courtroom, briefly allowing him a false sense of calm. Brandon's smirk was diminished, replaced with a subtle tension he could not hide. Camille's presence alone, her poised composure, had already begun to shift the balance of power. Outside the courtroom, Camille took a slow breath, the cool air brushing her face. This was only the first part of the high-stakes confrontation. But in that moment, she felt the quiet satisfaction of strategy in motion. Months of preparation, patience, and observation had brought her to this point. Brandon Hayes had underestimated her at every step, and now in the public eye, that underestimation was about to be revealed for all to see. Camille returned to her seat inside, ready to continue. The first part of the courtroom battle had demonstrated her calm authority, her meticulous preparation, and her unshakable focus. Every detail of Brandon's arrogance, every overconfident gesture, every claim of transparency had been catalogued, observed, and prepared for systematic exposure. The next session would bring the first tangible unraveling of his facade, and Camille Ross would ensure it was both precise and irreversible. The courtroom fell silent as the session resumed after recess. Camille Ross settled into her seat with the calm, unshakable composure that had become her trademark. Her fingers lightly rested on the envelope containing the meticulously organized evidence, each document representing months of quiet vigilance and painstaking preparation. Brandon Hayes, unaware of the storm about to engulf him, shifted in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced precision, his smirk a thin veil over a growing unease he did not yet recognize. Lauren Mitchell leaned slightly toward Camille, her voice barely above a whisper. "Remember, Camille, let him continue. Every claim he makes is another thread for our tapestry. Timing is everything." Camille nodded imperceptibly, her gaze fixed on Brandon, watching as he prepared to speak. The judge, Eleanor Davis, gestured for Brandon's attorney to proceed, signaling that the second part of the high-stakes confrontation had begun. Brandon rose, his posture confident, his voice smooth and commanding. "Your Honor, I must emphasize that every statement I have made regarding joint assets, investments, and shared finances has been transparent and above board. Camille Ross has been fully aware of all transactions, all allocations, and all decisions made regarding our financial interests. Any suggestion to the contrary is not only inaccurate, it is misleading and designed to malign my character." Camille's lips curved into a slight controlled smile. Every boast, every attempt to assert dominance only further revealed the cracks in Brandon's facade. She had anticipated his arguments, had traced each statement back to discrepancies, and now all that remained was to unveil the evidence she had quietly accumulated. Lauren leaned closer again, passing Camille a set of cross-reference spreadsheets and annotated emails. Every claim he's making Camille is contradicted by his own actions. The offshore accounts, the hidden transfers, the unauthorized expenditures, all documented. This is our moment. Camille's eyes flicked through the files, confirming each connection, each inconsistency. Her mind remained focused, calm, calculating. She was not reacting emotionally. She was executing a strategy that would leave Brandon exposed beyond repair. Brandon continued attempting to sway the judge and courtroom spectators with his practiced narrative. He spoke of fairness, generosity, and transparency, painting himself as a man of integrity who had been wronged by allegations of deceit. But Camille, observing him, silently recognized the subtle contradictions in his words. A transfer he had labeled as personal expense had actually been diverted to an account under a pseudonym. A claimed investment had never been reported to joint records. Each lie, each omission had been carefully noted and cataloged by Camille. Judge Eleanor Davis listened intently, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. She noticed the subtle hesitation in Brandon's tone, the slight overemphasis on transparency, the careful repetition of phrases meant to reassure. Camille's presence, calm and unwavering, contrasted sharply with Brandon's forced confidence. The room itself seemed to lean toward her quiet authority. At the precise moment, Camille leaned forward and placed the first document from the envelope on the table. The court clerk passed it to the judge, who glanced over the contents. The document was simple, yet damning, a detailed ledger of unauthorized transfers cross-referenced with dates and communications that Brandon himself had approved. Brandon's confident smirk faltered. His eyes darted toward Camille, then to the judge and back again. For the first time, he recognized that the careful narrative he had built was crumbling. Camille did not need to speak loudly. The documents spoke for themselves. Every overconfident claim he had made was contradicted by concrete evidence, and the courtroom could see it plainly. Lauren Mitchell took over, her voice calm, methodical, and authoritative. She guided the judge through the evidence, highlighting the discrepancies, the hidden accounts, and the communications that revealed intent. Your Honor, as you can see, Lauren said, gesturing toward the documents, the transactions Mr. Hayes claims were transparent were in fact deliberately concealed from Miss Ross. These offshore accounts, transfers, and financial maneuvers were executed without her knowledge or consent. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, attempting to interject, but Judge Davis raised a hand, signaling him to remain seated. His usual assertiveness was now restrained, his confidence waning under the weight of incontrovertible proof. Camille remained calm, her gaze steady, her posture impeccable. She had orchestrated this moment with precision, allowing Brandon's arrogance to lead him into a corner from which he could not escape. The courtroom murmured with quiet fascination. Observers leaned forward, sensing the high-stakes drama unfolding. The evidence was compelling, undeniable, and meticulously presented. Brandon, who had relied on charm and intimidation, now faced the stark reality of his miscalculations. Camille's silent strategy had transformed her from a perceived victim into the architect of his exposure. Camille slowly stood, her movements deliberate and commanding. She addressed the court in a calm, measured voice, her eyes meeting Brandon's. Your Honor, the documents before you provide a clear, factual record of Mr. Hayes' financial conduct. Each transfer, each diversion, each concealment has been documented, verified, and cross-referenced. The transparency he claims is contradicted by his own actions. This is not speculation. This is evidence. The room was tense. Every attendee acutely aware of the gravity of the moment. Brandon's attorney attempted to challenge the documents, claiming procedural errors and questioning authenticity, but Lauren Mitchell was prepared. Each objection was countered with verification, corroboration, and methodical clarity. The courtroom could see the precision, the preparation, and the undeniable truth behind Camille's presentation. Brandon's smirk had vanished entirely. He shifted in his seat, running a hand through his hair, eyes flicking nervously between Camille the judge and the assembled documents. His confidence, which had been his armor, now served only to highlight the depth of his exposure. Every boast, every overconfident remark he had made prior to the hearing had become evidence against him, and Camille had anticipated it all. By mid-afternoon, the pattern was undeniable. Every lie, every concealment, every deliberate misrepresentation had been meticulously laid bare. The courtroom could see clearly that Brandon Hayes' claims of transparency were false, and Camille Ross had orchestrated it all with quiet, methodical authority. She did not raise her voice. She did not display anger. She did not need theatrics. Her calm, calculated presence, combined with incontrovertible evidence, was more than enough to unmask Brandon completely. Camille returned to her seat, her expression serene, almost regal. She allowed Brandon a fleeting glance, seeing in his eyes the dawning realization of defeat. He had assumed his wealth, his charm, and his arrogance would shield him. He had underestimated her, believing her patience was weakness, her silent submission. Yet here she was, standing poised and in full command of the truth. Judge Eleanor Davis took a deep breath, reviewing the documents with meticulous attention. The room remained tense, the weight of justice palpable. Brandon remained seated, his posture rigid, his confidence eroded by the clarity and precision of Camille's strategy. She did not gloat. She did not taunt. She simply existed as the embodiment of calm authority, a woman who had turned betrayal, arrogance, and deception into an opportunity to assert undeniable truth. As the session drew to a temporary close, Camille allowed herself a subtle, imperceptible smile. The first stage of the high-stakes confrontation had succeeded. Brandon Hayes had been unmasked, not through emotional outburst or theatrics, but through patience, preparation, and a relentless commitment to exposing the truth. The next steps would further solidify Camille's dominance, but for now the courtroom had witnessed the quiet, formidable power of a woman underestimated for far too long. The courtroom was thick with anticipation as the second day of proceedings began. Camille Ross sat at her designated table, her posture calm and authoritative, her hands resting lightly on the stack of meticulously organized documents. Today was the day Brandon Hayes would be forced to confront the reality he had spent years denying. The arrogance that had once shielded him now seemed like a fragile veneer ready to crack under the weight of undeniable evidence. Brandon entered the courtroom with the same practiced confidence, his designer suit immaculate, his smirk as polished as ever. Yet, Camille noticed subtle signs of tension, a quick glance to the side, a tightening of his jaw, a brief hesitation as he approached the podium. He believed he could maintain control, but even he could sense that the tide had shifted. Camille's quiet presence exuded authority, and the envelope containing the compiled evidence sat like a silent weapon between them, ready to expose the truth. Judge Eleanor Davis called the court to order, her voice cutting through the murmur of anticipation. Brandon's attorney began with a rehearsed defense, attempting to discredit the previous day's revelations, framing them as misinterpretations or coincidences. Brandon spoke alongside, reiterating his claims of transparency, fairness, and integrity. Your Honor, all financial statements, all asset allocations, and all investments have been fully disclosed. Any suggestion of concealment is categorically false, he declared, his voice resonating with a confidence he had long relied upon. Camille remained impassive, her eyes fixed steadily on him, absorbing every word, noting every inflection, every overemphasis. She did not need to respond immediately. The weight of her preparation and observation had already begun to undermine his composure. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, was another piece of the puzzle she had painstakingly constructed over months of careful work. Lauren Mitchell leaned in quietly, her voice calm and precise. Camille let him talk. Every statement he makes strengthens the discrepancies. Every boast highlights his contradictions. Camille's fingers brushed the envelope lightly, reaffirming her resolve. The documents inside contained detailed evidence of unauthorized transfers, misallocated funds, hidden accounts, and corroborating statements from Olivia Grant and Marcus Lee. These were not merely suspicions, they were concrete proof that Brandon Hayes had consistently acted in bad faith. The first witness of the day, Olivia Grant, was called to testify. Her composure mirrored Camille's calm, professional precise. She recounted instances of Brandon's manipulation and concealment of funds, providing timestamps, emails, and internal communications that directly contradicted his claims of transparency. Brandon attempted to interject, but Judge Davis maintained strict control, allowing Olivia to deliver her testimony uninterrupted. Each word, each fact, each piece of evidence chipped away at the carefully constructed facade Brandon had relied upon for so long. Camille observed him carefully. His confident posture had shifted into subtle signs of agitation, the tapping of his fingers against the table, a quick glance toward his attorney, the faint narrowing of his eyes. He tried to reclaim control with dismissive gestures, but the courtroom had begun to recognize the inconsistencies in his statements. Camille's calm authority created a contrast that highlighted his flaws, without her ever raising her voice. Lauren Mitchell presented the next set of evidence with precision. Documents were laid out sequentially, showing the chronological flow of concealed transactions and misrepresented investments. Each annotation was cross-referenced with emails, bank statements, and official records. "Your Honor, the pattern is clear." Lauren explained, her voice steady. Mr. Hayes systematically diverted funds without Miss Ross's knowledge or consent. The transparency he claims is demonstrably false. Brandon's eyes flickered to Camille, searching for any sign of fear or uncertainty. There was none. Her calm, measured gaze, combined with the unassailable evidence, created a psychological pressure that words alone could not convey. Camille had learned long ago that strength was not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it was quiet, relentless, and undeniable. The courtroom began to murmur as the sequence of evidence was made clear. Journalists leaned forward, scribbling notes, capturing the drama of a man whose overconfidence had led to his unraveling. Brandon's attorney attempted to challenge the documents, citing procedural technicalities and questioning the authenticity of the presented evidence. Lauren Mitchell countered each objection calmly, presenting corroborated statements and verified financial records. Every attempt to deflect only served to reinforce the validity of Camille's case. Brandon's confidence wavered further as Judge Davis scrutinized the evidence. The ledger of hidden transfers, the detailed timeline of unauthorized investments, the emails and messages confirming intent all presented a cohesive narrative that contradicted every assertion he had made. He shifted in his chair, running a hand through his hair, a subtle sign of his growing realization he could no longer control the narrative. Camille allowed herself a brief internal acknowledgement of progress. Months of patient observation, careful documentation, and strategic preparation were coming to fruition. She had anticipated every argument, every attempt at distraction, every overconfident claim, and each one had been neutralized by verified evidence and methodical presentation. Brandon Hayes, once the dominant figure in her life, was now cornered, exposed, and vulnerable. The final witness of the day, Marcus Lee, provided additional corroboration, linking suspicious financial maneuvers to Brandon's own communications. His testimony aligned perfectly with the documented evidence, leaving no room for doubt. Camille observed Brandon's reaction, the tightening of his jaw, the slight slump of his shoulders, the controlled but obvious signs of stress. Every gesture confirmed what Camille already knew: he had underestimated her. And now the consequences were unavoidable. As the session progressed, Camille rose, stepping forward with quiet authority. She did not need to shout, to plead, or to dramatize. She placed the folder containing the most critical evidence directly on the table. Judge Davis took it, reviewing each page carefully, nodding subtly as the evidence was assessed. Camille's calm, precise demeanor contrasted sharply with Brandon's increasingly rigid posture. The courtroom could see the power dynamic shift, subtle yet unmistakable. "Your Honor," Camille began, her voice steady and deliberate, "the documents before you provide a complete and verifiable record of Mr. Hayes' actions. Each transaction, each concealment, and each misleading statement is documented and corroborated. The transparency and fairness he claims are contradicted by the evidence. This is not speculation, it is fact." Brandon's face betrayed the first visible signs of panic. He opened his mouth, hesitated, and then tried to speak, but the weight of the evidence left him momentarily paralyzed. Camille remained still, her calm presence amplifying the impact of the revealed truth. She had allowed him to expose himself through arrogance and overconfidence, and now the courtroom bore witness to the undeniable reality of his deceit. The session concluded with Judge Davis acknowledging the clarity and weight of the evidence. Brandon sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of Camille's meticulous preparation settling in. He had been confronted not by theatrics or anger, but by precision, patience, and an unshakable commitment to truth. Camille had transformed her patience and observation into power, and now Brandon Hayes was forced to face the consequences. The tension in the courtroom had shifted palpably after the revelations of Brandon Hayes' financial and personal betrayals. Camille Ross sat with composed authority, her hands lightly resting on the folder of meticulously organized evidence, her eyes calm and unwavering. The courtroom observers, reporters, and legal professionals had witnessed the unraveling of Brandon's carefully constructed image. And now the reactions of those closest to him added another layer to the drama. Brandon's family members, seated in the front row, could no longer maintain the pretense of casual support. His mother, once a picture of elegance and confidence, pressed a hand to her lips, her eyes wide with shock. The realization that her son, whom she had championed as a paragon of success and integrity, had deceived not only Camille, but everyone around him, was evident in her trembling hands. His father, who had often boasted about Brandon's business acumen, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, muttering under his breath and casting quick, guilty glances at his son. Each movement betrayed a mixture of disbelief, shame, and the dawning understanding that the man they had idolized was deeply flawed. Camille observed quietly, noting the subtle nuances of each family member's reaction. The power dynamic had changed, and even the people who had once bolstered Brandon's confidence could no longer hide their recognition of the truth. Camille's calm presence and meticulous preparation had exposed more than his deceit. It had revealed his vulnerabilities to those who had long been complicit in enabling his arrogance. Meanwhile, Camille's allies and friends, seated just a few rows behind, felt a contrasting sense of validation and respect. Marcus Lee, who had been a silent observer and discreet support throughout the ordeal, exchanged a subtle nod with Camille. He had witnessed her patience, her strategy, and her unwavering focus. Now, seeing the courtroom acknowledge the weight of her preparation, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Olivia Grant, whose testimony had been critical in revealing Brandon's misdeeds, also felt the quiet thrill of vindication. She knew that every piece of evidence she had provided had contributed to Camille's growing dominance in the courtroom. The courtroom murmurs grew as Brandon's closest friends and colleagues absorbed the implications. His public image, carefully curated over years, was crumbling. People who had once admired him for his wealth and perceived sophistication now saw a man whose arrogance had led him into exposure. Camille's meticulous orchestration of the evidence, her calm authority, and the unassailable facts presented had left Brandon isolated in his failure. He was no longer the dominant force. He was the subject of scrutiny, forced to confront not only the legal consequences of his actions, but the social ramifications as well. Lauren Mitchell leaned slightly toward Camille, whispering with measured authority, "Notice the shift. They are seeing what we have seen all along. His support system is fracturing, and it's entirely because of the clarity and precision of our presentation." Camille nodded subtly, her expression composed, but internally aware of the magnitude of this moment. The emotional reactions of Brandon's family and social circle amplified the impact of the evidence itself. It was not enough to expose deceit legally. The human element, the social acknowledgement of wrongdoing, was equally powerful. As witnesses concluded their statements and the evidence was fully laid out, the reactions intensified. Brandon's mother covered her face briefly, tears threatening to spill, while his father's hand clenched tightly in his lap. His younger siblings, who had long admired him, exchanged uncertain glances, the foundation of their trust shaken. The arrogance that Brandon had relied upon to intimidate and control had dissolved in the face of undeniable truth. and the reactions of those who mattered to him most underscored the magnitude of his exposure. Camille's friends, by contrast, were quietly triumphant. They had witnessed her struggle, her patience, and her strategic intelligence. Seeing her composure matched with tangible results was empowering. Marcus Lee leaned back slightly in his chair, a subtle expression of pride crossing his features. He understood the long, methodical process that had led to this moment, the silent accumulation of evidence, the careful orchestration of testimony, and the calculated exposure of Brandon's flaws. Camille had executed her plan with precision, turning months of careful observation and documentation into a compelling, undeniable narrative. Even the court reporters who had seen countless high-profile cases leaned forward with anticipation. The contrast between Brandon's faltering composure and Camille's serene authority was stark. Observers began to recognize that Camille was not merely reacting to events. She was orchestrating them. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully timed presentation of evidence was deliberate. Her patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking had transformed her from a perceived victim into the architect of Brandon's exposure. Brandon, sensing the mounting acknowledgement of his failures among both friends and family, attempted to regain composure. He straightened his posture, his voice strained but controlled. "Your Honor," he began, attempting to address the court. I can explain." Yet even as he spoke, the reactions around him, the disappointed looks from family, the subtle nods of approval toward Camille, the quiet validation in the eyes of the courtroom reminded him that his credibility was fractured. His words fell flat, unable to repair the damage that had been done. Camille allowed him to speak, listening intently, her calm demeanor unwavering. She did not interrupt, did not display emotion. Her silence amplified the impact of the evidence she had presented. Each faltering word from Brandon highlighted his overconfidence, his arrogance, and his misjudgment of her intelligence and composure. Camille had prepared for this, and every human reaction around her validated the precision of her strategy. As the courtroom session drew to a pause, Camille reflected on the subtle yet profound shift in perception. Brandon Hayes had been revealed not only legally but socially. His support system was fractured, his credibility damaged, and his arrogance exposed. Camille's patience and methodical preparation had created a scenario where the truth could not be denied, and the reactions of family and friends underscored the human cost of his deceit. Lauren Mitchell leaned in, her whisper barely audible. "This is the culmination of months of preparation." Notice how even his closest supporters are questioning him now. "Camille, your quiet strength is reshaping the entire room." Camille nodded, her calm smile, acknowledging both the tactical success and the justice being realized. She had transformed betrayal and arrogance into a vehicle for empowerment, and the social recognition of Brandon's failings was an integral part of the victory. By the end of the session, the courtroom had absorbed the full impact of the evidence and human reactions. Brandon Hayes, once the dominant figure in both the legal and social spheres, was now isolated, scrutinized, and undeniably exposed. Camille Ross remained poised, authoritative, and calm, the embodiment of strategic intelligence and quiet power. The reactions of those around her, shock, shame, admiration, and validation, reinforced the narrative she had so carefully constructed. Camille gathered her documents as the judge called for a brief recess. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, not in revenge, but in the quiet triumph of truth, preparation, and unwavering resolve. The courtroom had seen both the legal evidence and the human reactions that confirmed her authority and power. Brandon Hayes had been exposed on every front, and Camille's patience, intelligence, and strategic calm had turned the tide completely in her favor. The courtroom fell into a hush as Judge Eleanor Davis adjusted her glasses, signaling that the moment for final judgment had arrived. Camille Ross remained seated, her posture calm and authoritative. Every movement deliberate, every gesture controlled. Months of preparation, patience, and meticulous strategy had led to this day. Brandon Hayes sat rigidly across from her, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes that he struggled to mask with his usual bravado. The air was thick with tension, anticipation, and the quiet power of justice poised to be delivered. The judge cleared her throat, her voice carrying the weight of authority and decisiveness. "We have reviewed the evidence presented over the past 2 days, including detailed financial records, witness testimonies, and corroborated documentation of alleged misconduct. It is now the court's responsibility to render a decision based on facts, integrity, and legal standards." Brandon shifted in his seat, attempting a confident posture, but Camille's composed presence left him no room to dominate. Her calm authority contrasted sharply with his strained demeanor. He was used to commanding rooms, influencing opinions, and controlling narratives. Yet here, faced with the culmination of her preparation and the undeniable weight of truth, he was vulnerable. Camille's eyes met the judge's briefly, a subtle nod, acknowledging her readiness. Lauren Mitchell leaned in slightly, whispering everything is aligned. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every cross-reference is perfect. Your composure alone is shifting the dynamic. You're ready. Camille allowed herself a faint, controlled smile, her calm confidence radiating through the room. Judge Davis continued, her tone firm and measured. "Mr. Hayes, the court has found clear evidence of financial misconduct, deliberate concealment of assets, and misrepresentation of financial transactions. The documents presented by Ms. Ross, corroborated by witness testimony and verified financial records, establish beyond reasonable doubt that you have acted in direct violation of your fiduciary obligations and the trust inherent in your marital partnership." Brandon's face betrayed the first signs of panic. He opened his mouth to protest, but Judge Davis raised a hand, silencing him. "This court finds that Ms. Ross has acted diligently, methodically, and transparently in uncovering these discrepancies. Her patience, preparation, and commitment to the truth have established a compelling case of misconduct that cannot be ignored or dismissed." The courtroom murmured in reaction, the weight of the judgment settling like a tangible presence. Camille's friends and allies, including Marcus Lee and Olivia Grant, exchanged subtle nods of approval. They had witnessed her strategic precision, her patience, and her unwavering calm. And now the court's acknowledgement validated every effort. Brandon, however, remained isolated, his overconfidence stripped away, leaving only the stark reality of his exposure. Judge Davis continued, her words deliberate and commanding. "In consideration of the evidence, this court orders that Mr. Hayes return all misappropriated funds to Ms. Ross, including full restitution of hidden assets and compensation for financial damages incurred due to deliberate concealment and misrepresentation. Additionally, Mr. Hayes is prohibited from any unilateral control over shared assets without the oversight of Ms. Ross or her legal representatives." The gravity of the decision sank in. Brandon's eyes widened, his hands gripping the edges of the table, as if he was physically anchoring himself against the magnitude of the court's ruling. His arrogance, which had carried him through countless boardrooms and negotiations, had failed him completely in the face of Camille's meticulously documented evidence and composed authority. Camille remained seated, her expression serene. She did not raise her voice or gloat. She had no need to. The weight of justice, the clarity of truth, and the recognition of her strategic intelligence were evident in every reaction around her. Her presence alone, calm and commanding, reinforced the finality of the decision. She had turned months of betrayal and observation into an unassailable narrative, leaving Brandon with no room to maneuver. Lauren Mitchell leaned slightly toward Camille, whispering with controlled excitement, "You did it. Every detail, every preparation, every subtle observation, it all led to this. He's exposed, and you've reclaimed your authority completely." Camille allowed herself a quiet exhale, acknowledging the culmination of her strategy without unnecessary fanfare. Her strength had been measured deliberate and precise, and now it had yielded undeniable results. The courtroom continued to absorb the magnitude of the judgment. Reporters scribbled notes, furiously capturing the unprecedented unraveling of Brandon Hayes' public and private persona. His family, who had once sat in quiet confidence, now appeared subdued, the veneer of loyalty and admiration replaced with discomfort and muted acknowledgement. Friends and colleagues exchanged whispers, some in disbelief, others in recognition of Camille's methodical victory. Judge Davis concluded the proceedings with finality. This court recognizes the resilience, intelligence, and strategic acumen demonstrated by Miss Ross throughout this process. The ruling reflects not only the factual evidence presented, but the integrity and diligence with which she pursued justice. Court adjourned. Camille rose gracefully, gathering her documents with calm precision. She allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, noting the subtle shifts in demeanor. Brandon's isolation, the quiet respect of her supporters, the acknowledgement of her strategic authority. Each observation reinforced the reality that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Brandon Hayes remained seated, his face pale, and drawn, the finality of the judgment pressing down on him. He had been a master of manipulation, a man accustomed to control, yet he now confronted the consequences of underestimating Camille Ross. The arrogance that had defined him was stripped bare, leaving vulnerability and the stark realization that his actions had consequences he could no longer escape. Outside the courtroom, Camille allowed herself a moment of reflection. The city skyline stretched before her, a vast expanse of lights and possibilities. She had reclaimed not only her financial stability, but also her agency, her authority, and that of her dignity. Months of preparation, careful observation, and strategic execution had culminated in an unassailable victory. She had not acted out of vengeance, but from a place of clarity, justice, and empowerment. As she walked away from the courthouse, Camille felt the weight of freedom, the quiet satisfaction of meticulous planning, and the power of truth finally recognized. Brandon Hayes had faced the full measure of his deception, exposed not through anger or confrontation, but through patient, calculated precision. Camille Ross had transformed betrayal into empowerment strategy, into undeniable authority, and silence into a formidable force of justice. The doors of the courthouse closed behind Camille Ross, leaving behind the echoes of gavel strikes and whispered acknowledgments. Outside, the city stretched beneath a fading afternoon sun, its streets alive with the rhythm of life, indifferent to the courtroom drama that had just unfolded. Camille inhaled deeply, savoring the quiet moment of triumph before turning her attention to the next phase, rebuilding, reclaiming, and redefining her life on her own terms. The months of preparation and confrontation had taken their toll, yet they had also illuminated Camille's strength and resilience. She had faced betrayal, deception, and manipulation with calm precision, transforming what could have been a narrative of victimhood into a story of empowerment. Now free from the shadow of Brandon Hayes' deceit, she could focus entirely on herself, her career, her ambitions, and her future. Camille's first steps were deliberate. She returned to her office, a sleek space overlooking the city, a tangible reflection of the life she had built with her own intellect and effort. The office was quiet, serene, a place where strategy, creativity, and ambition converged. She opened the blinds to let in the light, symbolically welcoming clarity, transparency, and a renewed sense of purpose into her space. Lauren Mitchell, ever the vigilant strategist, had prepared a roadmap for Camille's next moves. "You've won in the courtroom," Lauren said, her voice steady but warm. "But now we focus on consolidation, reclaiming financial control, rebuilding professional networks, and reinforcing your authority in every sphere that Brandon tried to dominate." Camille listened intently, appreciating the clarity of the plan. Every recommendation was precise, actionable, and aligned with her long-term vision. Camille began by reviewing her financial portfolio, meticulously assessing investments, assets, and future opportunities. With Brandon's influence removed, she had full control, but she approached the task with the same discipline and precision that had guided her through the courtroom battles. She made strategic adjustments, diversifying holdings, securing long-term stability, and ensuring transparency in every transaction. Each decision was deliberate, reflecting both her intelligence and the hard-earned wisdom that came from confronting betrayal. Simultaneously, Camille reached out to her professional network. She scheduled meetings with trusted associates, investors, and mentors, carefully recalibrating relationships that had been strained or manipulated during her marriage. Each conversation was measured strategic and empowering. She was no longer reacting to the whims of another person. She was initiating, directing, and controlling the trajectory of her career. Her allies, Marcus Lee and Olivia Grant, continued to support her, offering guidance and validation. Marcus had been a constant presence, his knowledge and discretion invaluable in navigating complex business matters. Olivia, whose courage and testimony had been pivotal in exposing Brandon's misdeeds, provided insights into operational transparency and organizational management. Together, they formed a support network that reinforced Camille's autonomy and strategic authority. As Camille engaged in the meticulous work of rebuilding, she also attended to her personal growth. She resumed hobbies and activities that had been neglected during the years of navigating deceit and manipulation. Writing, traveling, and engaging in creative pursuits that nurtured both mind and spirit. Each activity reinforced her sense of self-independence and empowerment. She recognized that true rebuilding extended beyond financial and professional realms. It encompassed emotional and intellectual reclamation. In parallel, Camille considered the broader implications of her journey. The exposure of Brandon Hayes' misconduct had not only restored her personal integrity, but it also created a precedent for accountability. She began exploring initiatives to support others who had faced betrayal, manipulation, or financial exploitation. This vision extended her personal empowerment into a platform for collective advocacy, reinforcing the impact of her actions far beyond the courtroom. During this period, Camille also cultivated a public narrative. She engaged with select media outlets, sharing insights and experiences without divulging unnecessary personal details. Her statements were measured, articulate, and composed, reflecting a woman in command of her life and circumstances. Through these engagements, she reinforced both personal and professional credibility, demonstrating that her strength lay not in retaliation, but in resilience, preparation, and strategic execution. Financially, Camille consolidated control over previously shared assets, ensuring transparent management and securing long-term investments. She worked closely with Lauren Mitchell to formalize structures that prevented unilateral actions by any external parties, thereby safeguarding the autonomy she had fought to reclaim. Every decision was deliberate, calculated, and oriented toward stability and growth. Camille also redefined her daily routines. Mornings were dedicated to strategic planning and professional correspondence, afternoons to meetings and portfolio management, and evenings to reflection, creative work, and self-care. This disciplined structure provided both clarity and balance, allowing her to navigate the complexities of life with calm authority. Socially, Camille rebuilt her circle with intention and precision. She nurtured relationships with individuals who valued integrity, intelligence, and mutual respect, while gracefully distancing herself from those who had enabled or overlooked deceit. Each interaction was a conscious choice, reinforcing boundaries and reinforcing her autonomy. Perhaps most importantly, Camille embraced the emotional and psychological aspects of her empowerment. She practiced mindfulness, reflection, and strategic patience, recognizing that true authority emanated not from coercion or domination, but from calm, deliberate, and consistent action. Her composure, patience, and intelligence became the cornerstone of her renewed presence in both professional and personal arenas. By the end of the month, Camille's life had transformed from reactive survival to proactive mastery. She had reclaimed her assets, rebuilt her professional network, and established a structured, intentional approach to personal and career growth. Brandon Hayes, now removed from any sphere of influence, served as a cautionary example rather than an active adversary. Camille's strategy, patience, and intelligence had turned vulnerability into a platform for empowerment. As Camille looked out over the city from her office, the skyline illuminated by the fading golden light of the late afternoon, she felt a profound sense of agency. Every challenge she had faced, every slight, every betrayal had contributed to her strength and strategic acuity. Her life was no longer defined by the actions of another. It was defined by her own choices, discipline, and vision. In this quiet moment of reflection, Camille acknowledged the significance of her journey. She had navigated deceit, exposure, and confrontation with calm authority, transforming each challenge into an opportunity for empowerment. Her life was now a testament to the power of preparation, patience, and strategic action. She had reclaimed her autonomy, her dignity, and her future, and, in doing so, had set a standard for resilience and empowerment that would guide her in all endeavors to come. Camille Ross sat quietly in her apartment, the city lights twinkling below a soft hum of life, continuing unabated beyond her walls. For months, she had meticulously planned, observed and executed a strategy that had finally brought Brandon Hayes' deceit and arrogance to light. Yet, as the legal battles concluded and financial control was fully restored, Camille recognized that the journey toward true empowerment required more than reclaiming assets or asserting authority. It required healing. The betrayal she had endured, the subtle manipulations, the arrogance, and the lies had left deep traces not in her intelligence or composure, but in her sense of trust and emotional equilibrium. Camille understood that reclaiming her power meant addressing the personal scars that Brandon's actions had inflicted. She began by confronting the feelings she had long suppressed: disappointment, anger, grief, and an undeniable sense of loss for the life she had once imagined. In the early hours of the morning, she started journaling, a practice she had rediscovered during the months of preparation. Her pen moved steadily across the page, documenting memories, reflecting on choices, and exploring emotions. Writing became both a method of processing and a tool of clarity, helping her to organize the chaos of the past into coherent patterns. Each entry was deliberate and a structured conversation with herself, allowing her to reconcile the intensity of her experiences with the clarity of her present authority. Camille also sought support from trusted confidants. Marcus Lee had remained a steady presence throughout, offering guidance and insight without judgment. Olivia Grant had been instrumental in exposing Brandon's duplicity, and her perspective helped Camille contextualize the events from a broader vantage point. Lauren Mitchell, always precise and strategic, also provided subtle encouragement, reminding Camille that empowerment was not only about external victories, but about internal alignment and peace. Therapy became a crucial element in Camille's healing. She scheduled sessions with a professional who specialized in high-conflict interpersonal dynamics and betrayal trauma. These sessions allowed her to articulate experiences she had internalized, to identify patterns of manipulation she had endured, and to develop strategies for emotional resilience. Camille approached therapy with the same methodical intensity she had applied to her financial and legal strategies, analyzing, reflecting, and extracting actionable insights. Outside her structured work and therapeutic practice, Camille re-engaged with life in small but meaningful ways. She began to dedicate time to creative pursuits, rediscovering passions that had been overshadowed by the stress of marital betrayal and legal battles. Painting, music, and writing offered not only solace, but a channel for expressing emotions that words alone could not fully capture. Each brushstroke, each note, each sentence was a quiet affirmation of autonomy, creativity, and emotional strength. Camille also focused on rebuilding social connections in ways that were intentional and nurturing. She reconnected with friends whose loyalty and integrity had been proven, cultivating relationships that reinforced mutual respect and understanding. She distanced herself from those who had enabled Brandon's behavior or failed to recognize the depth of his deceit. In these interactions, Camille discovered that healing was not only personal, but relational. Reclaiming trust, respect, and authentic connection was a central part of her empowerment. Daily meditation and mindfulness practices became integral to Camille's routine. Each morning, she would sit quietly observing her thoughts, without judgment, focusing on her breath, and envisioning a life unburdened by past betrayals. These practices allowed her to maintain equilibrium in the face of residual stress and to cultivate an inner calm that radiated outward in every interaction. She understood that true empowerment was as much about controlling the mind and emotions as it was about managing external circumstances. Camille also engaged in reflective walks across the city, immersing herself in the rhythm of life around her. She observed people's scenes and interactions with a quiet curiosity, contemplating the resilience inherent in human experience. These walks reinforced a sense of perspective that her personal journey, though intensely challenging, was part of a broader tapestry of life growth and learning. As weeks passed, Camille began to notice shifts within herself. The tightness in her chest, the subtle anxiety that had accompanied interactions with Brandon or discussions of finances began to ease. Her confidence, already reinforced through strategic victories, now extended into emotional self-assurance. She felt a renewed capacity to engage with the world without fear, without hesitation, and without the residual weight of past betrayals. Camille also allowed herself moments of quiet celebration. She did not indulge in ostentatious displays of victory, but she acknowledged her achievements, both external and internal. Reclaiming her autonomy, asserting her authority, and achieving legal justice were milestones, yet the subtle personal victories, healing emotional clarity, and the restoration of self-trust carried equal significance. In her reflections, Camille realized that empowerment and healing were intertwined. By confronting betrayal with strategy and calm authority, she had established a foundation of external power. By dedicating herself to emotional processing, reflection, and intentional living, she had fortified the inner strength that would sustain her through future challenges. The combination of strategic action and emotional resilience created a holistic, enduring form of empowerment. Camille also considered the broader implications of her journey. Her experience illuminated the necessity of vigilance, patience, and the cultivation of inner strength in the face of deception. She recognized the value of careful observation, meticulous preparation, and the strategic use of evidence. But she also understood that emotional integrity and self-awareness were equally essential in achieving sustainable empowerment. By the end of the month, Camille Ross had established a balanced life, integrating professional authority, financial control, and emotional clarity. She had transformed the aftermath of betrayal into a platform for growth, empowerment, and influence. Her life was no longer defined by the actions of another, but by her choices, strategy, and the deliberate cultivation of resilience. In a quiet moment, Camille sat at her apartment window, gazing at the city lights below. She reflected on the months of preparation, confrontation, and healing. Each step, each decision, each action had reinforced her autonomy, authority, and confidence. She had navigated betrayal with calm precision and strategic intelligence, and now through intentional reflection, creative engagement, and emotional work, she had restored her inner equilibrium. Camille Ross had transformed a narrative of victimhood into a testament of empowerment. She had faced deception with patience and strategy, exposed dishonesty with precision, and reclaimed her life with unwavering authority. The final phase of her journey, the healing of the emotional and psychological scars, was complete. She had emerged not only victorious, but whole, her composure and strength a beacon of resilience and empowerment for herself and others. Camille Ross had reclaimed her life, her autonomy, and her authority, yet she knew that true empowerment extended beyond personal victories. The lessons learned from months of careful observation, meticulous preparation, and courtroom triumph had illuminated a broader truth. Empowerment was most meaningful when it was shared, when it could inspire and protect others facing similar challenges. With this perspective, Camille began to chart a new course, one that would transform personal strength into a platform for collective impact. Her first step was establishing the Camille Ross Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting women who had faced betrayal, manipulation, or financial exploitation. The foundation's mission was clear: provide legal assistance, financial literacy programs, and mentorship to those seeking to reclaim control over their lives. Camille's vision was informed by her own experiences. She understood the intersection of emotional resilience, strategic thinking, and resource access. and she was determined to ensure that other women could benefit from both guidance and empowerment. Camille spent weeks meticulously planning the foundation's structure, ensuring that every operational detail was precise. She consulted with legal experts, financial advisors, and experienced nonprofit managers to design programs that were both effective and sustainable. Her approach reflected the same methodical precision she had applied in the courtroom. Every decision, every partnership, every initiative was deliberate, measurable, and strategically aligned with her vision. In tandem with the foundation, Camille began engaging with media and public forums to share her story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a blueprint for empowerment. She crafted narratives that highlighted strategic patience observation and the importance of emotional resilience in confronting betrayal. Her interviews were articulate, measured, and authoritative, offering insights into how women could navigate complex challenges with intelligence and composure. Each engagement reinforced her credibility, her influence, and her role as a beacon of guidance for others. Camille also focused on mentoring emerging professionals in her industry, sharing knowledge gained through years of experience and the intense lessons of her personal journey. She provided guidance on strategic decision-making leadership and navigating complex interpersonal dynamics. Her mentorship emphasized not only technical expertise, but the cultivation of emotional intelligence, resilience, and ethical leadership. By investing in the next generation, Camille extended her impact far beyond personal recovery. Financially, Camille continued to consolidate her control, but with a strategic eye toward sustainability and impact. She diversified investments, secured long-term ventures, and created structures that ensured transparency and accountability. Her financial acumen, honed through both personal experience and professional diligence, allowed her to leverage resources effectively, creating opportunities for both personal growth and philanthropic initiatives. Socially, Camille redefined her network with intention. She nurtured relationships grounded in integrity, respect, and mutual support, distancing herself from connections that had enabled or ignored deceit in the past. Her social interactions became purposeful, each engagement reinforcing her authority, credibility, and the values she now championed publicly. The circle she cultivated was not only a support system, but also a community aligned with her vision for empowerment. Camille also embraced creative and personal pursuits, integrating them into her daily life as mechanisms for reflection, inspiration, and emotional fortification. Writing, painting, and travel became channels through which she could process experiences, explore new perspectives, and maintain balance amidst her expanding professional and philanthropic responsibilities. Each activity reinforced her identity as a woman who had overcome betrayal not merely by external victory, but through sustained personal growth. The Foundation's initial programs were met with immediate enthusiasm. Women from diverse backgrounds sought guidance, mentorship, and support, sharing stories of financial manipulation, relational betrayal, and systemic obstacles. Camille listened attentively, offering strategic advice, legal guidance, and emotional support. Her calm, authoritative presence provided a model of resilience, demonstrating that empowerment was cultivated through preparation, patience, and deliberate action. Camille's public engagement extended to conferences, panel discussions, and media appearances. She spoke on topics of financial literacy, emotional resilience, strategic decision-making, and empowerment in the face of adversity. Her narratives were grounded in experience, demonstrating how strategic patience and meticulous preparation could turn betrayal into opportunity, silence into authority, and adversity into growth. Audience members responded with admiration, inspiration, and a renewed commitment to personal agency. In her personal life, Camille prioritized balance, integrating structured routines that supported both professional engagement and personal well-being. Early mornings were dedicated to planning and strategy, afternoons to foundation management and mentorship, and evenings to reflection and creative pursuits. This structured approach reinforced clarity, focus, and resilience, ensuring that Camille's empowerment was both sustainable and deeply rooted. Financially, she implemented systems to safeguard her assets and ensure ethical, transparent management. Every transaction, investment, and philanthropic contribution was documented and strategically aligned with long-term objectives. Her attention to detail, honed through months of careful observation and courtroom preparation, ensured that resources were deployed efficiently and effectively, maximizing both personal and societal impact. Camille also cultivated a network of like-minded individuals committed to ethical leadership, empowerment, and advocacy. Collaborations with other professionals, nonprofit organizations, and mentors strengthened the foundation's reach and influence. Camille's leadership was characterized by clarity, authority, and strategic foresight, ensuring that her initiatives were both impactful and sustainable. Over time, Camille's story became a testament to the power of strategic patience, meticulous preparation, and deliberate action. She had transformed betrayal and exposure into a platform for empowerment, creating a legacy of resilience and influence. Her life was no longer defined by past deceit or manipulation. It was defined by deliberate choices, strategic action, and a commitment to empowering others. As Camille Ross looked out over the city skyline from her office window, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her professional achievements, philanthropic initiatives, and personal growth were all aligned, creating a life marked by authority, influence, and clarity of purpose. Brandon Hayes, once a symbol of manipulation and arrogance, had been rendered powerless in the face of her strategies and composure. Camille's future, however, was expansive, visionary, and self-determined. She reflected on the journey from betrayal to empowerment, recognizing that her strength lay not only in legal and financial victories, but in the deliberate cultivation of authority, strategic patience, and emotional resilience. Every decision, every initiative, every carefully executed plan had contributed to a life redefined, a narrative reclaimed, and a legacy established. Camille's life had evolved into a model of empowerment, demonstrating that true strength arises from preparation, patience, and the deliberate transformation of adversity into opportunity. She had reclaimed her narrative, redefined her purpose, and established a foundation that would extend her influence far beyond personal victories. In every sense, Camille Ross had emerged as a woman of authority, vision, and enduring power. The final day of the proceedings arrived, and the atmosphere in the courthouse was electric, charged with anticipation. Camille Ross walked in with the calm authority that had become her signature. Every step she took, every measured movement, exuded control. Months of preparation, observation, and strategic action had led to this culminating moment, the last confrontation, the final opportunity to assert clarity, authority, and justice. Brandon Hayes, seated across the room, looked increasingly uneasy, his once effortless arrogance now shadowed by uncertainty. Judge Eleanor Davis called the court to order, her presence commanding immediate attention. "We will proceed with the final statements and the conclusive presentation of evidence." "In this case," she announced, Brandon attempted to compose himself, adjusting his suit and smirking as if the confident man he had always been could return in this moment. Camille's presence, however, neutralized his performance. Her quiet composure and unflinching gaze reminded everyone that she had orchestrated the exposure of his deceit and manipulation from start to finish. The first witness of the session took the stand, Olivia Grant. She delivered her testimony succinctly, calmly, and methodically, reinforcing the evidence that Camille and Lauren Mitchell had meticulously prepared. Every email, every transaction, every clandestine meeting Brandon had attempted to hide was now documented, verified, and presented with clarity. Olivia's delivery, steady and authoritative, left no room for ambiguity. Each corroborated detail tightened the noose around Brandon Hayes' overconfidence and duplicity. Brandon's attorney attempted to interject, citing procedural technicalities and questioning the admissibility of certain documents. Lauren Mitchell countered each point with precision, referencing verification methods, corroborated witness accounts, and financial records that left no room for dispute. Every objection he raised only underscored his desperation and the fragility of his position. Camille, seated quietly, observed each exchange, noting the subtle cracks in his demeanor and the courtroom's shifting perception of authority. As the session progressed, the momentum in the courtroom clearly favored Camille. The subtle nods, whispered comments, and focused attention of observers highlighted the growing recognition of her strategic intelligence and composure. Brandon's attempts at deflection became increasingly transparent. Each objection less convincing, each interruption more futile. Camille had anticipated every maneuver, every boast, every attempt at control. And the final act of exposure was now within her grasp. At a critical juncture, Camille stood and walked deliberately to the center of the courtroom. The envelope containing the compiled evidence was in her hand, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. Every document inside represented months of meticulous observation, careful cross-referencing, and strategic planning. As she approached the courtroom, hushed in anticipation, Brandon Hayes, realizing the finality of the moment, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence waning. "Your Honor, Camille," began, her voice calm yet resonant, carrying the authority of someone who had endured betrayal, documented deceit, and prepared with unflinching precision. The evidence presented throughout these proceedings, corroborated by multiple witnesses and verified financial records, demonstrates the full extent of Mr. Hayes' actions. From the concealment of assets to misrepresentation and personal betrayals, every detail has been meticulously documented and presented for consideration. She carefully laid the documents on the table, organized for clarity and impact. Each spreadsheet, email, and annotated ledger was aligned to reveal a comprehensive narrative of Brandon's misconduct. Camille did not need to embellish, shout, or dramatize. The precision, clarity, and authority of her presentation spoke louder than any emotion could. Her calm demeanor, combined with the evidence, created an almost palpable sense of inevitability in the room. Brandon shifted in his seat, attempting to assert control, but the courtroom had already shifted. The witnesses, the documented evidence, and Camille's composed authority created a momentum that could not be disrupted. Judge Eleanor Davis examined the documents carefully, nodding subtly at their thoroughness and coherence. Every point Camille had raised was reinforced by verification and corroboration, leaving no room for misinterpretation or doubt. The reactions of those present were telling. Camille's allies, Marcus Lee and Olivia Grant, exchanged subtle glances of pride and quiet satisfaction. They had witnessed the strategic unfolding of months of careful planning, and now the culmination was manifest in the courtroom's recognition of Camille's authority and composure. Brandon's supporters, on the other hand, shifted uneasily, their confidence shaken by the clarity and comprehensiveness of the evidence presented. As the final statements were made, Camille concluded with a calm, measured affirmation of her narrative. This case is not merely about financial recovery or legal restitution. She said, her voice steady, deliberate, and authoritative. It is about accountability, integrity, and the recognition that strategic patience, meticulous preparation, and calm authority are forces of justice. The exposure of deceit and the assertion of truth are not acts of revenge, but the restoration of balance and dignity. The courtroom absorbed her words in a charged silence. Brandon Hayes, now visibly shaken, understood that his attempts at domination, manipulation, and deception had failed entirely. Camille Ross had not only reclaimed her assets and authority, but had also demonstrated a mastery of strategy, observation, and composure that rendered him powerless in comparison. Judge Davis, after reviewing all documents and testimonies, once more addressed the court decisively. The evidence is compelling, coherent, and fully corroborated. Mr. Hayes' claims of transparency, fairness, and integrity are demonstrably false. This court finds in favor of Miss Ross on all counts, including full restitution of misappropriated assets, oversight of remaining joint investments, and recognition of the emotional and personal impacts of the conduct in question. Brandon sat silently, the weight of the ruling settling over him. His arrogance, once a shield, had become his exposure. Camille's calm, methodical approach, combined with her meticulous documentation and composed authority, had left him no escape. The courtroom, which had once been a stage for his dominance, now recognized her as the orchestrator of truth, justice, and empowerment. Camille returned to her seat, her expression serene, her posture composed. She did not celebrate loudly, for the victory had been methodical and deliberate. Yet every glance, every acknowledgement from the court, and every reaction from Brandon Hayes reflected the magnitude of her achievement. She had transformed patience into power, observation into strategy and meticulous preparation into undeniable authority. As the courtroom cleared, Camille gathered her documents, the envelope now empty, but symbolically full of the victories achieved. Outside, the city lights reflected the end of a long strategic journey, one that had moved from betrayal and observation to confrontation, exposure, and ultimate empowerment. Her life, now fully reclaimed, reflected a balance of authority, strategy, and resilience. Camille Ross had navigated deception with calm precision, transformed betrayal into strategy, and asserted her autonomy with unassailable authority. The final confrontation had not been about spectacle or emotion. It had been about clarity, preparation, and the quiet, inexorable assertion of truth. Brandon Hayes had been exposed, his power dismantled, and Camille's life had been irreversibly transformed by her resilient strategy and composure. In that moment, Camille allowed herself a deep exhale, a recognition of the journey completed and the empowerment fully realized. The courthouse, the courtroom, and even Brandon Hayes' presence were now echoes of a past she had mastered, leaving her free to step into a future defined by strategy, authority, and unwavering strength. The journey of Camille Ross is more than a story of betrayal and triumph. It is a testament to the quiet power of patience, strategy, and self-belief. Life often challenges us with situations that test our trust, resilience, and composure. Camille's experience reminds us that true empowerment is not loud or impulsive. It is cultivated in the silent, deliberate choices we make, the preparation we invest in, and the courage to face adversity without losing our integrity. She transformed every obstacle into an opportunity for growth, every setback into a stepping stone toward clarity and justice. Her story teaches a profound life lesson. Strength is not only measured by what we achieve externally, but by the inner fortitude to reclaim our narrative, restore our dignity, and emerge stronger after betrayal. In a world where deceit, arrogance, and unfairness often prevail, Camille's calm authority, resilience, and strategic brilliance show that justice and empowerment are possible when patience meets determination and reflection guides action. If Camille's journey resonates with you, think about the moments in your own life where patience, clarity, and inner strength could transform challenges into victories. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. How have you turned adversity into empowerment? And if you want to follow more stories of courage, strategy, and triumph, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for inspiring tales that remind us of the power within us all.